I look around at us, you know what I see? Losers. I mean, like, folks who have lost stuff. And we have, man, we have, all of us. Our homes, our families, normal lives. And usually life takes more than it gives, but not today. Today it's given us something. It has given us a chance.
To do what?
To give a shit.
Oh boy, where do I even begin with this one? Making a movie is difficult. Filmmaking in general is a rather tough obstacle, and while I can't say I know that since I'm not actually a filmmaker, rather an obnoxious movie buff who enjoys anything and everything geek related. The question in perspective, however, is how does someone go from making a feature film in a universe? How does someone go from making the first film in a trilogy we didn't expect? How does one go from making Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, an origin story, a movie that many people didn't expect to exceed expectations and surpass certain things, when all we wanted were characters like the Avengers and others? James Gunn was one of the few to step up and give us characters that not many people knew about and got us to love these characters. He made a movie that blew audience expectations and got them to love these characters like I just said. But now, where do you go from there? To quote one of my favorite video essayists out there and the man that got me to want to make content out there like this, that being High Top, you basically make a sequel that blows their minds away, getting them to support you even more, and getting the company you're working for, have them give you creative control to an extent to get your true vision out there. But now, where does one go from here? How does one truly finish their story? Well, my friends, I'll tell you how. James Gunn really went all out for his third and final installment in his Guardians of the Galaxy film, and I have to say that after watching this movie, it's marvelous and breathtaking and will have you on an emotional ride. It will hit all emotions, whether you say you're not gonna cry or not. This movie got me and many of my friends to tear up in ways we didn't even expect. It's your favorite Ravager, that guy Frank. Yours truly, and come on, let's go watch my video, my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This film starts off very, very bittersweet. In many ways, the opening feels like a beautiful mix of Volume 1 meeting Volume 2. And by that I mean, it starts off pretty nice, but also very, very depressing as the movie goes on. While we do get to see our lovable ragtag group of heroes, things aren't looking as great. Yes, they are still together and they're still very much like a family we got to see form these bonds and relationships in the previous films. We also come to find out that there is some tension amongst the group, and no, not the sexual tension. I'm talking about the tension that one feels when the friend group is about to go their separate ways, or you feel like they're just gonna disband and you're never gonna see these guys again. With Guardians of the Galaxy picking up after the events of Endgame, and to anyone who dared watch Thor Love and Boredom, I salute you, because I'm never gonna watch that movie. I don't really care. I love the Guardians, don't get me wrong, but I'm not gonna give my time to that movie after all the stuff that came out with it.
Did you see it?
Yeah, tough shit. And also, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy special that I still need to watch. That one actually looks fun.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
This group is a shell of what it once was. Quill is depressed after many failed attempts to try and get the love of his life, Gamora, back to be with him. But the only issue is that Gamora isn't exactly his Gamora. While she is still part of the timeline where they first met, the timing of everything is just off. The Gamora that we knew is technically dead, whereas the Gamora that we see is an alternate variant of that one. He tries to find a way to cope with it, but does something very unhealthy and essentially says that she's dead. In reality, she's not. You also have Drax being the lovable idiot that we all know and love, but you can tell that there's something building inside of him that we don't get to see come into fruition up until the end of the film. Then you have Mantis, who went from being this one comedy character to Drax to now being a character that actually goes from being the cheerleader to a more important character role in this film. While her role is to still bring everyone together, give them some hope, she does it even better and she shines throughout this entire film. And although she does butt heads with the likes of Nebula, they've managed to find a way to cope and live amongst one another instead of just saying awful shit to one another. And to finally top it off of all things, you also have Rocket and Groot just being Rocket and Groot throughout the entire film. The Guardians are trying to find a way to help Peter move on and deal with all the stress and depression he's going through, but they can't seem to find an answer for this problem. They don't have Star-Lord anymore, they don't have a captain to helm the ship, and it's just causing a lot of chaos amongst them. While they're not really mad at each other in that way or trying to kill each other, they're trying to find a way to get their best friend back, their brother, their captain back to where he needs to be. And that's helping not just them, but helping the entire galaxy. While Star-Lord is a questionable character at times, you can definitely see why he is an important character, the way that he brings this group together, even with his random moments of just saying stuff without really thinking it through, when it sounds better in his head than it does when he says it.
Can Footloose the movie?
Exactly like Footloose. Is it still the greatest movie in history?
He also does have very great motivational quotes to bring the group together. And that's what I love about this film. Rather than Quill being the main center of attention, James Gunn does something different and makes a shift in the dynamic, whereas now, the center of attention for Guardians Volume 3 is Rocket Raccoon. The Guardians are still being built up and they're going to have their stories continued, but this is very exciting and different. And I'm not saying that to jab on Peter Quill, as I love that character. It's very different seeing another character be the main point in the story. But what do we do with Rocket Raccoon? Simple. We make yet again another origin story, but rather than telling everyone exactly who the Guardians of the Galaxy are, we give them an origin about Rocket Raccoon and go in depth onto exactly what happened to him and continue the story of how this group went from being some of the most dumb characters in a lovable way to becoming a family at the end of everything and trying to find a way to come together and fight off the bad guys to save the freaking galaxy, man! We also have to blame the previous two films, the first one being Volume 1, where we get subtle hints and upbringings of Rocket's past as to how he was tortured, how he was a test subject, to Volume 2 going a little bit more in depth thanks to that one-on-one scene between him and Yondu. But now we get to truly witness Rocket Raccoon, who became this sarcastic, little chaotic piece of shit we all know and love. He's very much a broken, tragic hero. It's weird for me saying that, knowing that this is a fucking raccoon of all things, but James Gunn makes you sympathize and empathize with a raccoon of all things. Who exactly causes all of Rocket Raccoon's pain, all of the traumatic moments that he tries to hide and bury 6 feet under? I'll tell you who. It's the one and only High Evolutionary that looks exactly like the goddamn Surgeon General from Escape from New York or Escape from LA, whatever the hell movie it was. He's a knockoff Bruce Campbell as well as some Skeletor wannabe piece of shit. In a good way. Here's where James Gunn's Marvel villains are different than the Marvel villains. Most Marvel villains tend to be either one-dimensional villains that are just made to be the final boss for our heroes to come together and defeat the bad guys, yay, and they save the world and all, but recently, they did start to change the dynamic, making many villains feel almost human, as if to try and make us either root and sympathize with, whether it was Loki, Killmonger, or even Thanos. They find ways for us to try to reason with these villains, even at their worst moments possible. But James Gunn did something very, very different with the High Evolutionary. He's a very complex, sadistic villain that is a straight-up horror movie monster throughout. The way that I see it, James Gunn took what didn't work for Ronan the Accuser, which is that hate angst arc, but perfected it with the likes of Ego being a sadistic killer. You know, it worked with him because he was a slimeball sleazebag played magnificently by the likes of Kurt Russell that made that character feel like my favorite villain of all time, MJF. He's better than us, and we know it, because this character is not a villain you want to fuck around and find out with. This guy is just a straight up villain. You're not meant to like him, you're meant to hate him, and he gets the job done. This is the true definition of a heel, ladies and gentlemen. This is a guy you will hate because of all the fucked up things he does to not just the animals, but the way he gets away with treating other creatures and other races without any remorse for their life. This villain's motives is about wanting to make the world perfect. What exactly is perfect? In his eyes, he wants to create a perfect utopia where people aren't violent, but doing so will do it with any means necessary and putting many animals and many creatures in harm's way. The High Evolutionary will also just take things that are perfectly normal and make them twisted. A villain that I'd like to compare him to, just judging by his mannerisms, the way that he's brought onto the story, the film. It's almost like he's the MCU's version of Lord Voldemort, judging by the way that he carries himself. When they talk about the High Evolutionary, people go silent. They know the story, and they don't want to talk about it because of all this evil he brings with him. He can end things instantly, as he can also create life at the expense of many other things. He's created many species and civilizations, with one being the Sovereign, the biggest twist out of the entire franchise, and it's just mind-boggling. It just goes to show you how powerful this villain is, and it takes the likes of the entire group to truly bring him down at the end of the film. And granted, we've seen the whole group having to fight off villains like him, but this one just feels more horrifying than the previous two. But what does he have to do with the story aside from his motive about wanting to make the world perfect? After finding out that his former test subject lab rat, being Rocket Raccoon, still somehow alive, the High Evolutionary seeks out to find him and kill anyone who crosses his path, as Rocket serves a higher purpose in his quest for the perfect utopia. To make things interesting as well, he sends the likes of Adam Warlock to fetch his rat back, and doing so causes the Guardians to put their differences and problems aside to save their best friend. Now, I have already said spoilers, so I do apologize, but this next segment will just be all spoilers. Now that I've talked about the story and the motives, I really wanted to get into the spoilers of this film and talk about the film's standout characters, those being Nebula and Rocket Raccoon. James Gunn is a very crazy, creative individual, and I mean that in a very good way. He went from making horror films to superhero films, but always had this unique charm to him as well as to his characters, and always found a way to make them feel human and vulnerable, and he does just about every member of the Guardians to the core right. He makes them feel special in their own way. But there's big character building within the likes of Nebula and Rocket. When this franchise first began, we just knew most of these characters as this ragtag group of mercenaries willing to sell one another for a credit, but eventually they grew together. Bonds were made sacred, and these characters became a family. And it's wild as well seeing the likes of Nebula go from the daughter of Thanos, the Mad Titan, troubled and tortured mentally and physically as she'd been manipulated by this sadistic man, to going from trying to kill her sister and the Guardians to helping them in Volume 2, becoming family, becoming friends with these people, helping them take on her father in Infinity War and Endgame. And while in Infinity War it was in vain, they got their revenge in Endgame. She eventually grew a heart and now defends the Guardians and calls them a family. Nebula again had gone from a sadistic, abused, psychopathic warrior to a hero willing to sacrifice her life for her friends and family, as well as innocent people, as when we first see Warlock arrive on nowhere, posing a threat to her people, her family. She does what she can do best and try to save and protect everyone, even if it means getting the absolute shit kicked out of her. What helps her character more is that she wasn't just rushed from the start, rather built up on piece by piece, slowly and effectively through Gunn's films, as well as Infinity War and Endgame, serving time with the likes of Tony Stark, having fun, or at least trying to in a bleak, dark moment. She became more human and less villainous, just like Gamora going from being the daughter of Thanos to a guardian of the freaking galaxy. Nebula is a special character, and you'll see exactly why when you go watch this movie. But now, to talk about the main man, or the main Raccoon. Rocket was and is definitely the heart and soul of the Guardians, and is one of the most interesting characters throughout the franchise. He wasn't just some smart, psychotic mercenary with insane, messed up ideas that wanted to steal shit from other people, but he was also a much more grounded character in the franchise. Rocket had this troubled story we didn't fully know about until Guardians 3, and it hurt so hard, and it made me tear up when I first saw it. And I know that it's just, a CGI animal, but the way that it was written, the way that this character was written, and the writing made his character perfect, and it leaves the audiences to sympathize with him as he nearly died. Rocket's journey, as we come to find out, is a depressing origin that nothing can compare to, as he was experimented on, watched other animals get abused and murdered with no remorse, and even saw his best friends die, his only friends, leaving him alone until he found the likes of Groot and the Guardians. Guardians Volume 3 is just perfect storytelling all around, and full circle for all characters we all know and love. I know for some it may be average just because they had higher expectations for the likes of Adam Warlock, but I like the direct approach Gunn went with, because I kind of thought that Warlock in the comics, he's kind of cool, but he's also kind of boring, and you can't just have so many overpowered characters in the MCU. You gotta make them at least interesting, otherwise they're just gonna be boring. And Eyebrows, that's just how I know Will Poulter, Eyebrows does a fine job at this version of Adam Warlock. Guardians, to me, is definitely one of the best Marvel films recently, and one of their heavy hitters so far. I don't know what to expect, as this film finishes their story as a unit, as now we have to realize that they all have to go their own separate ways, both literally and figuratively, as Gunn is now in charge of DC's direction. Dave Bautista had wanted to retire the character and pursue other films and other projects, whereas the rest of the cast are also focused on their own other projects. I really only see Guardians working if Gunn, or someone just as passionate as him, makes these characters feel just as special as he made them special. That's the only way I see Marvel picking up the Guardians. If they just pick some random ass director and writer, or if they just take full control, do their cookie cutter formula, it's just gonna feel like a Marvel movie. And again, I have to say, I hate having to say it doesn't feel like a Marvel movie, but Guardians of the Galaxy feels very special. That's what made the franchise, the trilogy, stand out from the whole conglomerate of what we know as the MCU. While the MCU does have good movies, the majority of Marvel films are just soulless cash grabs that don't feel like a film, whereas the rest of the films that are actually movies feel important, as you know that there's love behind those projects, that there is a story to tell in those projects, the way that they were meant to. I'm really hoping that if we do get another Guardians movie, Gunn is still the one in charge, or again, we get someone else to fill in the shoes, someone that's just as passionate and fights for these characters. Otherwise, it's just going to continue the downfall of the MCU. The way that the current state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not the best ride that many fans, including I, like to see. But I'm willing to be hopeful. I'm very hopeful to see what comes next. It's been your favorite ravaging pirate here, that guy Frankie. I don't know why I did an Australian or New Zealand accent, but I just did, mate. But yeah, it's been your favorite ravaging host, that guy Frankie. Yours truly, and see you next time, Space Cowboys.
Run fast for your mother, run fast for your father, run for your children, for your sisters and brothers. Leave all your loving wanna survive. The dark days are over. The dark